So our first talk this morning is an update on the legislative interim provided by Sarah Kirkle. Sarah serves as the Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs at the Texas Water Conservation Association. One thing that was very interesting in her bio that I read is this last sentence where it says, Sarah also spent 13 years at the Sunset Advisory Commission, where she was a member of the agency's executive management team and worked across most sectors of state government to make government work smaller and smarter. Now, Sarah, we would certainly hate to lose you, but I think they might need you in Washington, D.C. So with that, please welcome Sarah Kirkle.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here and kick this off bright and early this morning. One thing I do want to acknowledge is I gave a legislative update a few months ago with Julie Nargain with the Water Environment Association of Texas. So some of the slides are from her. So next time you see her, give her a nice thank you. She's great. So first, I just want to remind everybody who TWCA is. So the Texas Water Conservation Association, you know, the word conservation throws people sometimes because we're an 80-year-old organization, and the word conservation, when we were formed, was synonymous with water supply. Since that time, though, we've certainly grown, and we have a very diverse association that really represents the full water industry. The largest section of our membership is water districts and authorities. These are wholesaler, retail, water, and wastewater providers, but groundwater conservation districts make up a significant portion of our membership, a very valued section, and we have about half of the GCDs within TWCA's membership. So jumping into the legislative session, this is kind of a recap just to take you on a journey of where we've been in the last year and a half as a setup for as we go into the next legislative session in January. So as you know, the 88th session, regular session, ended at the end of May, and then 9 o'clock that same night, the governor called the first of 4 special sessions. So you can see kind of as a timeline there that the legislature spent nearly the entire last year in session in some way or another. This is very different for our legislature, which is a part-time legislature. They usually meet, 180 days every 2 years. The joke always is maybe they ought to meet for 2 days every 180 years. And so spending this much time in session is really unique for them. And it leads you into sort of thinking about how unique is it? They literally spent more time in session than any other time since Texas has been created in 1845. So they were here a lot. There was contentious issues going on. These special sessions were about school choice, about property tax reform. We had the House impeachment of Ken Paxton. We had the Senate come back and have the trial where they acquitted him. We had expulsion of a member for an inappropriate relationship with an underage staffer. All of these things have never happened in the history of Texas before. So it's a very unique situation. So the vibe is not great, right? They have been here a lot and they wanted to be home. Very tense, contentious issues, heated primary races over these issues, not just over these issues, but the governor who's looking to push some school choice, he wasn't able to get that accomplished through these special sessions. So he certainly was out on the campaign trail, going after members who weren't voting for school choice. You had the attorney general also on kind of a revenge tour of folks who voted to impeach him. And so you had just all of these really tense relationships. And so you don't have a lot of reaching across the aisle, excited to be here and compromise and make great policy for the state of Texas vibes going on right now. When you think about water, it's even worse. We are losing a significant portion of the people who understand the technical, complex nature of water. Representative Chasey King has been He's been on the Natural Resources Committee most of the sessions that he'd been in the legislature. He's our recent House Natural Resources Committee chairman. He's retiring. He's going to be a great loss, especially to groundwater. He's been a real champion for groundwater districts. And so that's going to be an area where we're going to have to do a lot of work to bring some people up to speed. For Price from Amarillo, when the first session I ever worked on groundwater issues, 2011, he was who I was working with on DFC appeals, reforming the joint planning process, somebody who can really get in there and understand those nuances of the process and what we're really trying to accomplish through joint planning. We're really going to miss him. Ed Thompson was the recent vice chair of the House Natural Resources Committee. Kyle Casal from Bryan College Station. He really has been on the front lines. As you know, there's a lot of large production permits over in that area, and so hearing the different sides of those contentious issues, he's really going to be a loss too. On the Senate, we have Senator Drew Springer, who's also retiring and not returning. And so, you know, every session we have the challenge of you have a lot of staff turnover, and so we spend a lot of time educating on sort of the basics of water issues. But for the large part of when I've been working with the legislature, you have had those key members who understand. Usually you have a group that's coming from more of a rural area. They are in touch with water. They understand groundwater. That's not what we have anymore. And so the education climb is going to be much steeper for us as we go into the session than ever before. So I just wanted to show you what this actually means for the House Natural Resources Committee. The names that are in bold are the ones that are not returning. And that's almost half the committee. You have a couple in there too that water's not maybe their main issue area, so I'm not sure if they're going to be returning. So you're going to have almost an entirely new Natural Resources Committee. The Senate's a little more stable. We, of course, are losing Senator Springer, and we're really disappointed about that, but we do have some pretty steady leadership there and some engagement from members from different parts of the state on water issues, so that's encouraging. So we're in the interim. The Senate has just one interim charge, which if you think back at how busy they've been last year, it kind of makes sense. They're exhausted. They don't want to have a long list of interim hearings and be in Austin a whole lot this year. And so it's not surprising they had just one interim charge. In water system reliability, it's very broad. It can mean almost anything. In their hearing in May, we had conversations about water supply. That's the big focus for Senator Perry this next session. We had conversations about workforce, about cybersecurity, and then when they meet in 2 weeks, they're going to be having conversations about small system consolidation and then doing some monitoring charges. On the House side, they're a little bit more ambitious, but they'll be doing this all in one hearing. You see here, past legislation is always a standard interim charge. It kind of gives them the cover to investigate things if the implementation's not going well. Reliability of clean water access is really about boil water notices. There have been a lot of service disruptions, largely from extreme weather and aging infrastructure. Water reuse is a continuing conversation, especially on the water supply front. And groundwater infrastructure is the one I'm going to focus on a little bit today, and it's very data focused. So they haven't posted yet, but the hearing date is rumored to be September 24th. So mark your calendars for that. And I put the text of the interim charge here so you can see it, but really what they're going to be looking at and talking about are gaps in groundwater data. What kind of data is missing that you need to inform your planning processes, to manage groundwater effectively, and to inform your decision-making processes on permitting and other things. So that's the conversation we'll be having in September. I put SB 28 implementation here. It was the biggest bill that came out of the last session. You'll probably remember this was the bill that created the Texas Water Fund, and it triggered $1 billion appropriation from the legislature to that fund, and voters approved that last November as Proposition 6. So we're excited to see that off and running. We have not seen funds actually appropriated yet, but a few weeks ago, the Water Development Board did approve an allocation plan for how to spend that money. I can talk more about that with you later. I want to keep this a little more groundwater focused, but they are still working on rulemaking for the new water supply fund, which is Senator Perry's baby. He's real excited about that one. And then we will expect to see some of the first funding awards here this fall. So going back to TWCA just a little bit, one of the things that we work during the interim to do is, because we have such a diverse group of stakeholders within our association, we have a legislative committee that works through a consensus process. So we sort of democratically take up issues that are important to the membership, and the members vote on which ones they want to take up. We form subcommittees, and we work through the process to try to get to a legislative proposal that people can agree on before we get to the Capitol and start fighting it out amongst ourselves. So in some sessions, these are more successful than others. In all cases, it's helpful to have the conversations about these contentious issues so that we know what the sticking points are that we need to focus on if we're going to move forward. This year, we have 5 subcommittees. I'm going to talk about the 2 that are focused on groundwater. The first one is groundwater permitting. We're going to be having some conversations about, do groundwater districts have the appropriate tools in the toolbox to enforce their permits? And this is really stemming from the Aqua Texas case, where Aqua Texas pumped double the amount of their permit and are now in some lawsuits with Hayes Trinity GCD. So having conversations about making sure, because obviously if we are not able as groundwater districts to enforce those permits, it really raises questions about our entire regulatory scheme, right? So it's very important we have strong tools. We're also going to have some conversations in that subcommittee about different approaches to large production permits. Really the concept there is some GCDs with large production permits, they're approving those permits with the idea that on the back end, they would curve everybody, give everybody a haircut. So the conversation is that the best approach? Are there other approaches? What should we be thinking about? So I see that more as a brainstorm, more than a focused legislative content conversation, but I think it'll be a really good conversation. The second one is about waste. So this conversation will be talking about some of the differences in law on what beneficial use means. In the groundwater and surface water worlds, there are very different approaches to that. So trying to bring everybody to a level playing field there. Having conversations about moving groundwater into surface water cores, conversations about use of groundwater in vanity ponds. None of these things are easy. These are all very contentious issues. I don't expect us to get to consensus, but as part of what we did in combining we used to have separate surface water and groundwater committees. We've combined them into one legislative committee. I think just like this issue of waste, we're going to try and get everybody in the room to start having those conversations, building those relationships, again, to see where are the sticking points so that we can focus our conversations moving forward. So I'm excited about the conversations. And both of these subcommittees are meeting for the first time next week. So real excited to get started with that and see where we get ahead of the session. In terms of policy expectations for the next session, cultural expectations, we talked about the vibe, we talked about all those divisions. I think you're going to see a lot of leadership changes or challenges. Obviously, the Republican Party is in power right now, but there are a lot of divisions within the Republican Party, as you know. So I think you're going to see stronger, larger factions of the Republican Party challenging whoever ends up as speaker. We will have a speaker race. Speaker Phelan did win he was in a runoff on his primary. So whether he can hang on to that speakership still remains to be seen, but there will be a lot more attention on that after November. More division, of course. When I talk about leadership challenges, one of the mundane kind of rules is it takes 10 votes to challenge the ruling of a chair. And the really far right-wing part of the Republican Party hasn't quite had that 10 votes, but they will this time. And so I think even if Dade Phelan's able to hang on to his speaker position, I think he will see a lot of challenges in being able to wrangle and keep all of those factions together. And when I say looking more and more like Congress, I don't mean that as a compliment. As you know, Congress is very divided, and they don't get much done. And Texas, though, we have division, we have those same factions, but we've actually been really good at passing a lot of bills. Our passage rate, it's usually between 15 and 17% of bills actually get passed. And we were right at that last session. We were able to sometimes the bigger, more contentious issues, of course, those get hung up. And when you're in it and you're at the end and you feel like everything's dying, we actually get a lot done. But if we have these internal divisions, in the party in power, the Republican Party, I think it's going to be a little bit harder to get some of that normal business of the state done. So I'm not excited about that, because that's where you start to see smaller bills that are good policy, get hung up in that process, and we don't want that. On the policy side, I think we're definitely going to have a water supply conversation. I know that because Senator Perry says we're going to have a water supply conversation. But when he says water supply, he is very focused on what he calls new water. And I mentioned the New Water Supply Fund earlier, and that was part of Senate Bill 28. And really, he's focused on introducing new water into our system and not reusing water that's already in our system. And his definition of that includes use of produced water outside of oil and gas. It includes desalination, which could be either brackish or marine. I understand he's very, very focused on brackish, so I think we're going to have some conversations about brackish next time, and I'm not sure exactly what direction we're going to be going and what those conversations look like. And also, he's interested in taking water from other states. So I know he's been having conversations with some of the neighboring states. Louisiana is always at the top of that list. We have water in Toledo Bend, which is on the border with Louisiana. We share that, Sabine River Authority, Louisiana, and Texas. And so moving that water into either DFW or Central Texas or somewhere in between is always a topic of conversation. Senator Perry's very focused on interregional projects, so bigger projects, because a lot of our small, easy-to-do groundwater development is already done. We are using a lot of groundwater in this state, and when you think about the big picture water supply conversation, those easy, go out and drill another well, that's not going to be an option in a lot of parts of the state in the long term. So we have to start thinking about other things. And that's why this water supply conversation is really important to the groundwater world. Because if you want to ease the pressure on those areas that are really being, overly mined for their groundwater, then that's why we've got to have all these other parts of the picture. Water supply answer. Everybody always looks for the silver bullet, and it's not there. We all, in this room, we all know that. It's going to take all of the different solutions for us to be able to meet our need. And so that's why this bigger conversation is really important. Of course, the key to getting this done is money. So we'll be having, we're hoping, another conversation about infrastructure funding. We got the $1 billion last time. We're really thankful for that. But again, like we say, it's just a drop in the bucket. We got a long way to go. The water plan itself is $80 billion, $80 billion in EPA needs, and that's just current needs for water and wastewater systems. Our programs at the Water Development Board are 7 times oversubscribed. You've heard all of these stats over and over again, and so we really need an infusion of funding. And we're hoping, I think you're going to have a conversation about the water energy nexus next time too, because since Hurricane Beryl, there's a lot of conversations about the grid. They've reassessed how to evaluate the demand that they anticipate coming online onto the grid in a different way. And it looks like the demand that we have on the grid could double within 6 years. So everybody's freaking out, and we should be freaking out. It's really important to fix. But water is important too. And so when we talk about the big things that are going to put pressure on the grid, which are data centers and hydrogen and industrial facilities, and Bitcoin mining, all of these things also take a significant amount of water. And so I think that's going to be a big part of the water community's conversation is, look, let's have those conversations about the pressures on the grid, but let's also acknowledge that it also has a relationship to the water. So excited about that. Interlocal contracts for joint planning. So this is an issue that's arising out of GMA 14, and Senator Perry has indicated that he would like to clarify which types of entities are able to enter into contracts to support technical assistance to inform the joint planning process. So since he said he's looking to do that, I anticipate we will. For those of you involved in our subcommittee, we'll be having just sort of a higher level conversation about that on Wednesday when we meet to talk about it. The permit enforcement tools, that's what I anticipate, something coming out of our subcommittee talking about what those permit enforcement tools look like, if we need to shore that up in any way to strengthen the ability of GCDs to do their job. And then I also think that we're going to have some previous topics from previous sessions. So DFC achievement, this conversation really is about our districts measuring their achievement towards that DFC. So you're required to manage to the DFC. Are you documenting that in a way that the public can see? So I think that might be a topic of conversation again. Permit notice to affected landowners. This is a former consensus issue out of TWCA. I think it may come up too. But this is just posting some notice in some way to inform landowners that there is a permit application that could impact them in some way. Petition for inquiry. There are some weaknesses in TCEQ's process, and so there's been a bill that came through. Most of that was consensus-based within TWCA as well, but I think that's an important part of that conversation. There are some GCDs that are in this room that participated in previous petitions, and they didn't get a whole lot of support from TCEQ, so this bill is really about focusing on TCEQ and making sure that they're required to provide the legal and administrative support to the GCDs that might be serving on that inquiry panel. And then administrative treatment of unreasonable DFCs. This is something I'm hoping will help the Water Development Board. Also a consensus item from TWCA from years past that really is just clarifying if a DFC is petitioned, which DFC needs to be included in the management plan. After that. And so it's really just an administrative conversation. I think when it comes, sometimes when things come out from TWCA, maybe people think it's a bigger deal than it is. This is really much more of an administrative conversation in my mind. So I'm hopeful that if the board is chasing that, then it's an easy fix for them to be able to clarify. But we'll see. All of these are just Sarah Kirkle's, like looking into my ball, this is what I think is going to happen. So who knows? And then just to wrap up, just some dates to keep in mind. November 5th is our election day, and then we'll start tracking bills and pre-filing on November the 11th. So that's when it all gears up, and we're excited about it. And with that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Any questions for Sarah? Can you please come to the microphone?
Thank you very much. Very great presentation. I just wanted to just ask if you foresee any kind of discussion about conservation. It's actually in your name, in the organization name. You know, you talk about new water resources. You talk about reusing water resources, but you know, the sustainability component, the conservation component. You know, using water more efficiently. I don't know if there's any. Normally, it's done at the local or regional level. I don't know if there's any discussion about that at the state level. And I don't even know what that would look like from a legislative view, but I just didn't know if that's happening at that point too. Because, you know, you constantly are looking for new resources, but you also want to use the water sustainably and efficiently already that we have. So.
Absolutely. The cheapest water is the water you already have, right? And so it's a big part of the conversation. In a couple of ways, really. Obviously, in the water planning process, we have conversations about conservation. It's something like 30% of the way that we intend to meet our needs is through conservation measures. But from a legislative perspective, the way that we've been dealing with that is in Senate Bill 28, conservation was one of the priorities for how the Water Board needs to spend that $1 billion. And so while you have some of your traditional conservation measures and some of that's public outreach, which is also a piece of that funding, water loss has been having a real moment. So the Living Waters report on water loss, which is essentially leaking pipes, how much water is leaking from the pipes across the major cities. It's an incredible amount. I mean, it's several reservoirs worth of water that's leaking from our pipes. And so that's another conservation measure that's been prioritized for funding, because that's one of the things we have. You know, the Water Development Board has a series of programs that fund infrastructure, but they all have kind of their unique focus. And so one of the priorities is making sure that we have the avenues for utilities to address those more routine maintenance type needs, and we still need more, and that's why we need more money, because you can get those big projects a lot of times through SWIFT, but the ongoing things are much more difficult to really get out there and help the local utilities address. All right, thank you very much for having me.